有冇搞錯啊？落魄都1000啦，話500。
係500萬噃。
Ah, Cantonese. It's the cool Chinese. So cool it can make a 1980s cell phone look like the latest iPhone.
好似呢個 Model F40咁樣，表面上係一個大哥電話，但你睇到呢度有層白金屬網膜，實際上佢係一個蘇跑嚟。
Play some canto pop and the girls instantly like you.
令我口竟不對心，開始放任。
And of course, they have the best curse words.
又係一條仆街冚家鏟。
Yeah, 仆街冚家鏟。
But did you know that Cantonese, compared to Mandarin, is actually closer to the form of ancient Chinese spoken during China's golden age of the Tang dynasty? And in this video, we are going to tell you why. This is the ancient origins of Cantonese. So Cantonese is one of China's principal dialects, referred to as Yue in this map. It is spoken in Guangdong province and in Hong Kong, and has been exported to just about every Chinatown in the world. Scholars have described Cantonese as a fossil of ancient Middle Chinese, which was spoken during the Northern and Southern dynasties, the Sui dynasty, and the Tang dynasty. And ancient Middle Chinese was the lingua franca of those times, i.e., the language that everyone spoke to communicate with each other, even if they spoke different dialects. Basically, the equivalent of what Mandarin is today. So why is Cantonese closer to the lingua franca of ancient times than Mandarin is? Well, we can look at 3 areas: vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. Let's start with vocabulary. Many of the words used in Cantonese, especially verbs, are exactly the same as what was used in ancient China. If you have studied classical Chinese, you will easily notice this. And these verbs are no longer in use in spoken Mandarin. For example, let's talk about verbs to do with eating food. The verb to eat in Cantonese is se. This is used in classical Chinese too, but in modern Mandarin, they use the newer verb 吃. The verb to drink in Cantonese is yam, but in Mandarin, they now use the word 喝. But those characters, se and yam, and in Mandarin they're pronounced shi and yin, they still retain their original meanings in Mandarin, and they're now just more formal ways of saying eat and drink. You wouldn't really use them in spoken Mandarin, but you can also see them in 2-character words, like the word for food in Mandarin is 食物, literally eat things or things that you eat. Then what about other verbs? Well, the verb to be in Cantonese is hai, whereas in modern Mandarin, they use the word shi. But if you look back only a couple of hundred years, you can see that same character, hai in Cantonese, which is pronounced xi in Mandarin, was in use in books like the classic novel Hong Lou Meng or Dream of the Red Chamber. That book was written in the vernacular, i.e. spoken Chinese, and based on the Beijing dialect of the time. Yet you see this character used as the verb to be many times in the text. So the Beijing dialect, which evolved into modern Mandarin, lost that usage of that character, but it was retained in Cantonese. Now let's look at nouns. Cantonese retains more single character nouns than Mandarin, which were inherited from ancient Chinese. For example, the word for cup is bui in Cantonese, but in Mandarin, they add a zi on the end, so it's beizi. The word for eyes in Cantonese is ngan, and that same character is pronounced yan in Mandarin, but they add another character behind it for the word for eyes to be yanjing. Now let's look at one more expression. The word to ask how many. In Mandarin, it's 多少. But in Cantonese, it's 几多, and you can see that exact word in the final line of this poem, 盆池, or Pond in a Bowl, by the Tang dynasty poet Han Yu. Waiting for the night to be deep and the bright moon to go, having a look, swimming around, how many stars can be seen? 几多星? Alright, so we have established that many words in Cantonese are directly from ancient Chinese, way more than in Mandarin. Now let's look at grammar. So it's much harder to know how close the grammar of Cantonese is to the spoken Chinese of ancient times, and that is because historically, Chinese people do not write in the same way that they speak. What was written down was formal, classical Chinese that would be grammatically different from what was spoken. But there are some clues to similarities. For example, in Mandarin, the word for rooster is gongji, but in Cantonese, they will say it the other way around. Then another example is the phrase for thank you very much. In Mandarin, we say 非常感谢, like extremely thank you. But in Cantonese, they say 唔該晒, with the sai at the end playing the role of extremely or very much. This is a structure that existed in ancient Chinese where the adverb was added at the end of a sentence as a supplement. Alright, so that is the grammar, the part we have least information about. Now let's get into talking about pronunciation, and we'll tell you why ancient Chinese poems are more likely to rhyme when you read them in Cantonese. So with pronunciation, there are two aspects to speak about. We have the tones and we have the actual sounds of the words themselves. Let's talk about the tones first. All Chinese dialects are tonal languages, and tones in Cantonese are way more obvious, in my opinion, than in Mandarin. Listen to this clip of Chow Yun-fat in God of Gamblers in Cantonese.
我跟你200萬，咁冇計啦！既然男歸玩到，咪陪佢玩下啦。
Now listen to the same scene dubbed in Mandarin.
200萬我跟了，那沒辙。既然南大哥想玩，我就陪他玩玩吧。
I think most people will feel the Cantonese sounds way more sing-songy, way more tonal, and you would be right, because modern Cantonese has 6 basic tones, whereas Mandarin only has 4. But actually in Cantonese, there are 3 more tones called entering tones, or yapsang, or rusheng if you pronounce it in Mandarin, that don't exist anymore in modern Mandarin Chinese. If we add those in, we get 9 tones. What exactly are these entering tones? Well, if you look at them on this chart, they appear to be the same as tone 1, 3, and 6. But they're not, because they are words ending in the letters of P, T, or K, in what is called a glottal stop, where it feels as if the sound is cut off, like the word but, which means pen. You can hear how the T isn't really pronounced fully. That sound can then be voiced in high, medium, and low tones. But, but. I remember my Cantonese professor in Cantonese 101 in university used the entering tone word, which is spelled F-U-K, to demonstrate the 3 entering tones, and repeated it over and over again to much laughter from us college students. Anyway, what are we talking about here? Oh, okay. How the tones of Cantonese are more similar to ancient Chinese. So the Qie Yun is an ancient Chinese rhyme dictionary that was published in 1601 AD during the Sui dynasty. The book was edited by a man named Lu Fayan. This book recorded the correct pronunciation and tone of individual Chinese characters at the time of writing. Modern Cantonese has 9 tones, and like we said, that can be lowered to 6 if you incorporate the 3 entering tones. But these 9 tones are identical to the tone system recorded in the Qie Yun. So modern Cantonese preserves the tonal structure of Tang dynasty Chinese. The poets of the Tang dynasty wrote their works according to the pronunciation standards laid out in the Qie Yun and its revised versions. Thus, if one reads Tang poems in Cantonese, the tonal structure will very likely match the original, and the poem is also more likely to rhyme. The tonal structure of Tang dynasty regulated verse, or Lü Shi, split the tones into 2 categories: level tones and oblique tones. Cantonese has 3 different level tones: high, mid, and low, all of which could be placed in the level tone category. Yet Mandarin now has only 1 level tone. So when Tang poems are read in Mandarin, the level tone category includes Mandarin rising tones as well. In the oblique tone category were placed all other tones, so rising tones, falling tones, and entering tones. These rising tones still correspond to the 2 rising tones in Cantonese, but in Mandarin they now correspond to the 3rd tone, a fall and then a small rise. The falling tone still corresponds to falling tones in both dialects, while the entering tone is still present in Cantonese. It is completely absent in Mandarin. Words that would have been entering tones are now distributed amongst the 4 Mandarin tones, and thus between level and oblique tones when poems are read using Mandarin pronunciation. There are set tone structures in Tang-regulated verse that poets adhere to. Here is one of them on screen now. Those characters represent level and oblique tones. If we now look at the first couplet of Du Fu's poem, Enjoying the Rain on a Spring Night, it reveals how Cantonese preserves the original tonal structure due to the fact that it preserves the entering tone. This character is pronounced fart in Cantonese. No, not fart, but fart. Completely different. And it is an entering tone, which would fit into the oblique tone category that is required by the structure of this poem. Yet in Mandarin, it is pronounced fa, and would thus be a level tone which would go against the tonal structure of the poem. It is worth noting that this character, which is pronounced si in Cantonese and shi in Mandarin, goes against the tonal structure in both Mandarin and Cantonese. This may be an example of the poet breaking the rules, or the Chinese character changing tones in Cantonese as well since it was written. Yet this example shows that while Mandarin has two tones that differ from the original tonal structure, Cantonese only has one, thus showing that by preserving the entering tone, Cantonese remains closer to the tones of ancient Middle Chinese than Mandarin does. So that is the tones, but what about the actual pronunciation of the words? Didn't I say that ancient poems are more likely to rhyme in Cantonese? Let's talk about that. So in addition to tones, the actual rhyming structures in Tang poems are preserved better in Cantonese than in Mandarin. Let's check out this poem by Li Bai, The Broad Virtue of Delivering Han to Serve the Emperor. Is it Han Solo? No, I don't think so.
Anything, Han? It's Han, but that's okay.
In Cantonese, these three characters are pronounced Wing, King, and Ming, and thus rhyme. I'm not adding the tones, okay, just for simplicity. Yet in Mandarin, the first character is pronounced wrong, and thus it leaves the first line out of the rhyming structure. While two of the characters do still rhyme in Mandarin, Cantonese preserves three rhyming characters, which is likely the complete original rhyme structure, as the third line was often left out of the rhyme. So all this shows you that Cantonese sticks closer to how the language may have sounded in ancient China. It's also not 100% the same, since it's over 1,000 years since the end of the Tang dynasty. I'm sure many characters still change their pronunciation over time, even in Cantonese. But the structure of the language, in its tones and the verbs that it uses, and some of the pronunciation, still stick very close to what was used in the Tang dynasty. I think that's why many scholars have called it a fossil of ancient Chinese. The structure is preserved, but the look and feel of it may have changed somewhat. What was once bone has turned to rock, but you can still see what it is, in the case of a fossil. I hope that metaphor makes sense. Now, if you have learned Mandarin, don't feel bad. Go read a Tang dynasty poem in Mandarin and you will find that many of the poems do still rhyme as well, just not quite as many as in Cantonese. And although the tones are different, if you don't look too deeply into how the tones were originally supposed to be, then you won't be able to tell the difference anyway. But one thing's for certain, if you only speak Mandarin, you're never going to be as cool as Chow Yun-fat. Okay, I realize he didn't actually speak any Cantonese in that clip, but it's a classic clip from a classic Cantonese movie that you should definitely check out. Alright guys, that is the video for today. Don't forget, if you want to see Chinese culture brought to life on stage, my co-host Jared is still on tour with Shenyun Performing Arts. They have 8 companies currently touring the world, and they have shows coming up at Lincoln Center in New York and a load of other places across the world in the next few weeks. So click the link below to watch the trailer, and if you go on to buy a ticket, use our code LCN2025 for a waived booking fee on all US tour dates. Please subscribe to Learn Chinese now if you are new, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.